sorry, they expect us to believe that that was a self-unaliving. She had 20 stab wounds, some in the back of her head and neck. It was a freezing cold day in 2011 in Philadelphia. Ellen Greenberg was a 27-year-old first grade teacher, and she really was an amazing woman. She was super intelligent and she was stunning too, as you can see. She lived in Manayunk with her fiance, Samuel Goldberg. On the day that tragedy struck, there was actually a huge snowstorm, so Ellen had to go home early from work, and she stopped for petrol really quickly at 1:30 p.m. and then got home. Her fiancé said that he went off to the gym just before 5 p.m. and I believe that this was a gym not far away, maybe even in the same building, and when he got back he said he found a horrific scene. Weirdly, at first he couldn't actually get into the apartment because he said that it was closed from the inside. It had apparently been like latched and he couldn't get in at first. He texted her things like, "Hello, open the door," and "You better have an excuse." He said he eventually finally managed to break down the door and he found her dead body lying on the floor. He immediately called 911 and said there's blood everywhere. He said he couldn't tell what happened. He seemed confused on the phone. He said maybe she'd fell and fallen, but she was bleeding from her head. My first instinct would be she's been murdered and there's somebody hiding. He then seemed very surprised and shouted, "Oh my God, she'd stabbed herself." That wouldn't be my initial reaction. He said there's a knife sticking out of her heart, and then he was like, maybe she fell on it. When paramedics got there, it was absolutely horrific. She'd been stabbed 20 times. And from the start, this was extremely controversial. Nothing seemed to make sense. It definitely didn't seem like it was a self-unaliving, but if the door was shut from the inside, how could anybody have even gotten in? My gut instinct is just that there would be no way that somebody would be able to do this to themselves. Stab wounds were so deep and brutal and in positions that I feel would just be impossible to inflict on yourself. One was deeply in her spine. Weirdly, investigators only found her DNA on herself and on the knife. She had no defensive wounds, indicating that there wasn't a struggle. But interestingly, she did have bruises all over her body in sort of various stages of healing. Like I said, there weren't any signs initially reported of forced entry other than obviously where the fiancé had to break in. But could she have been expecting somebody? Could she have voluntarily let somebody in thinking that it was her fiancé? Some people claim that because she went to the doctor about anxiety, that meant that she was depressed and she would have self-unalived. But like, I've been to the doctor for anxiety previously and I wouldn't do that. She hadn't searched online about methods, she hadn't left a note, and her parents are convinced this was a murder, and so am I. One of her wounds even appeared to have happened after her heart stopped because there was no blood in one of the wounds on her neck. Her death at first was ruled a homicide, but then it was very quickly changed to self-unaliving, and this caused absolute uproar. It just seems wild to me. But then, very, very recently, the original medical examiner signed a statement saying that her death should be designated as something other than self-unaliving. And so many other experts have said this too. They've said like this defies common sense. However, the latest ruling again determines it as self-unaliving, even as they now believe her total number of injuries were actually 23 and 31 bruises. How are we supposed to believe that she did this to herself? Guys, let me know what you think in the comments. What are your theories? Because this just absolutely makes no sense to me.